Hi, my name is Nick Bradley, and I'm a business growth expert. I work with entrepreneurs and investors to create empires by buying, scaling, and selling businesses. Catch me on this week's episode of The Jesse T Show.
Nick Bradley, welcome to The Jesse T Show, brother.
Hey, Jesse, it's fantastic to be here, mate. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. I know you're calling all the way in from, or zooming all the way in from London. How's the weather out there?
Do you know what? We're getting into spring. Oh, I say that. I'm looking outside my window now, and there are dark clouds and about to be a downpour. But
It's
at
weird.
least it's not cold.
I feel like the whole world is raining right now. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. It's raining. It's probably in the low 50s, which is fine. And it's been spring the last couple of weeks. It's been in the 70s and sunny. And I'm heading out to Peru Thursday morning, so 2 days from this airing of this episode, and it's the same kind of weather there too. So the whole world's raining. It sounds like.
Fantastic. Is that work or pleasure?
Oh man, it's a spiritual journey, man. I'm going to sit with some sacred plant medicines with a couple of ex-military guys that I'm really close with, but also they're entrepreneur badasses, and one of them sounds like he's in the same business as you. He does more like mergers and acquisitions and scaling type stuff. So tell us about you, brother. Tell us about your journey.
Great.
What's going on with you?
Yeah, so God, I mean, as I said, how long have you got, Jesse?
Plenty of time.
I'll give you the short version of the long story. I've spent my career effectively in mergers and acquisitions. So I worked for a number of years in the world of corporate for some big multinationals like News International under Rupert Murdoch. And then I worked for some other big publishing groups in the UK. I moved from Australia to the UK in 2003. Been based here for 17 years, but I did do a stint in New York working for a cool company called Getty Images for a period of time. And that got me into the world of what is private equity, high-level investments, turnarounds, scale-ups, and exits. And I've been involved in, over 100 acquisitions in my career and 24 business sales, for a combined value of just over $5.2 billion. So, but that's the fun part of the story. I can go back and tell you how I got there. Which might be
bring it, brother. We want to hear it all.
Yeah. So basically, I grew up in this little place called Adelaide, South Australia, which is at the very, very bottom of Australia. And it's famous for three things. It's famous for lots of churches. I don't know why, but if you go around the place, you just see like literally the spires of churches everywhere. It's famous for big sharks, like massive great white sharks. They filmed a lot of the open water scenes from Jaws in the seas around South Australia, and serial killers. Like literally, we've had more serial killers in Adelaide per head of population than I think any other kind of city in the world.
I wonder if one causes the other, like so many churches cause the serial killers, or they need church to go like repent. Like
the only thing I know is I had to leave, right? I had to leave. So I started my first business as like an entrepreneur, if you like, at 19. It was a fitness business in the gym scene. I was a personal trainer, but it was like a private studio. I had staff, I had a number of clients, and it gave me a certain amount of income. Certainly as a 19 to 20-year-old, I had plenty of cash. But it wasn't what I call a great business success. I ended up selling that business for $3,000, enough for me to get in my car and drive to Sydney. And that's when I started working for Rupert Murdoch. So I had a pretty illustrious career in that media world, lots of, fun, got up to some pretty high levels in terms of C-suite roles and things like that, board level roles. But I always had this frustration. Like if you knew me back then, I was a bit of an ass. And I had this massive chip on my shoulder, and it was all about the next title. It was the next pay rise. From the outside in looking, you'd be like, wow, this guy's got everything. He's got the $1 million house. He's got the Porsches. He's got everything, right? But inside, I was getting massively eaten up, like just, full on. And what it came down to was this, and I think it's an interesting, message for people listening, is I was told growing up that entrepreneurship was bad. And that, you had to have the safety of a job, right? So my grandfather, who I respect massively, one of the biggest influences in my life, he said to me, I don't care what you do, I want you to go to university. And once you've done that, I want you to get a job, right? So when I started this gym that ended up not being much of a success, I suppose in the back of my mind, I had this message, this programming, and I think I sabotaged its success. So just when it was about to really do well, is when I decided to chuck it all in. Wow. And then I went on this journey. I tell you that part of it because, as I said, I had lots of perceived success. But what started to happen is I got into this world of private equity. And I was involved in very, very full-on financial decisions. A lot of the decisions were pretty ruthless. I was the guy that would fly around to companies that were acquired by other companies, and I'd do these big turnarounds. And if you've ever seen, there's a movie called Up in the Air with George Clooney. And it's a terrible movie, actually. But he flies around and he just sacks people with these big white envelopes. And that was what I did. And so anyway, so I was starting to really feel not good. I was starting to physically feel not good. And one of the key parts of my story is this. My dad left us when I was 2 years of age. And you know, that you don't really know the scars of some of that until later on, right? They say, I think Freud said, show me the boy at 7, I'll show you the man, right? So all through that sort of early part of my life, I was trying to please this person that I'd never met. And then I was trying to live up to expectations. So I was quite confused and I was quite lost. And I remember I put on a whole heap of weight. I weigh something like 75 kilos now, Jesse. I was 130 kilos, wow. Almost not quite double, as a 10-year-old boy, and bullied and all this sort of stuff. And I went through this pretty full on. I had to transform myself to kind of, to do what I ended up doing and become successful in that corporate career. But anyway, my dad came back into my life when I was 34. So he left when I was 2, came back at 34, and I found out that he was an incredibly successful entrepreneur. So he had his first business. He was a millionaire in his late 30s. He lost everything in a terrorist attack in Melbourne. Wow. There was a bombing of the Turkish consulate next to this chain of jewelry stores that he had. He was broke and bankrupt in his 40s, and then he reinvented himself and started a whole nother set of businesses in his 50s and became a millionaire again. And so I met him when I was going through all this kind of challenging thought process. And then I realized that a lot of me was sort of from him, and I was this repressed entrepreneur. And so I met him, and then he passed away super quick. He got cancer and died within 12 months. Right. So I give you the long story because that sort of period of time, which was about 18 months in total, when I was going through this kind of certainly mental breakdown, emotional breakdown, then my dad comes back in. I realized that the entrepreneurial spirit and maybe some of the traits were from him. I had this massive meltdown, like literally. And, I had to change because I wasn't showing up as the right person for my wife, my kids, all that sort of stuff. As I said, even though it looked like perceived success on the outside. So I called up a mate, and he was a guy who retired in his late 20s. He sold his company for 65 million pounds. And he was always a bit weird when I knew him back at university. He was always the guy who never went out drinking or playing pool. And he was always into personal development. And he said to me, Nick, you've got to go and get yourself away for a few days. You've just got to get out of your environment. You've had your dad die. You've had all this stuff going on. You're stuck in this toxic world of private equity and greed. And he suggested that I go to a Tony Robbins event. So I remember speaking to my wife, and I literally, after having that phone call, I remember literally looking online, and about 3 weeks later, I ended up at this event in Chicago called Unleash the Power Within. Yeah. And I made the decision at that event to quit everything that I'd built. Like literally just say, that's it. This is the day when everything's going to change, right? The decision. So I came back, and I didn't quit straight away. I spent the next 12 months constructing what I do now, launched a podcast myself, had some success with that. And I've now got 2 separate 7-figure businesses, plus another 3 that are going to be there in the next 12 months. And I've created all that within about 19 months.
Beautiful, brother. You just made
a long story, but yeah. I think it's important to understand
Super
the context.
Powerful, and it's going to resonate with a lot of listeners and viewers. And so I had a similar experience with different circumstances with my father too. He was a heroin addict for the better part of his life, drug addict. He did probably about 30 years or so of focusing on drugs. And then for the last 10, 12 years of his life, he cleaned up and became a dad for the first time. And then also we called him Papa T, but Papa T to my kids. And so it was really the reconciliation for me was beautiful. And I know you only had 12 months, but did you have a chance to reconcile and build a relationship with him in that time, or was it too short?
No, we did because we had, there was a little bit of correspondence leading up to the time we spent together, because at that point, I was conflicted in so many ways. But this is the funny part of it all. So where it all came together, I run these crazy ultra distance races, and I was running this event called the Vermont 100 Mile. So I flew over to the US, and he was living in Melbourne at the time, and he flew out, and for the space of 2 weeks, we spent this really intense time together, and he actually crewed me in that race. So basically, when you run 100 miles, you need to have a support crew, people who kind of line up and give you drinks
Absolutely.
and food at various points. And so what was really funny about that whole 2 or 3 week period is that's probably the first time, I think, in his memory, he got to be a dad, right? Because he'd never had any other kids other than me. And that was the first time I ever had to connect with my father, if you like, even though I had my grandfather and others. And so it was magical. And then I remember, this is the bizarre bit. We ended up in Nantucket, and we were on this beautiful beach. And it was the night before he was about to fly back to Australia, and then I was going to be flying back to the UK. And it was beautiful. Like, he's playing with my little daughter, everything was perfect. And we said goodbye. And then 9 months later, the last time I saw him was the day before he died in hospital.
Wow.
In Melbourne.
Incredible.
And so you think about things that serve you in life, right? They're gifts if you see them as gifts. That whole lead up, the whole experience, had that not have happened, I probably would have kept doing what I'd been doing in this old world. And now what I've created since, not just the monetary side, the impact, the people I've helped, the mission to get into that, none of that would have happened, I think, unless that chain of events had happened.
Divine timing, brother. Everything definitely happens for a reason. And a lot of times, we don't have that perspective, but it seems like through your life's events and circumstances, you've been given that perspective, and it's a beautiful one to have, man. And kind of on a side note, how long have you been into doing ultras now?
So I first started the background to that very quickly is my grandfather, who, as I said, sort of brought me up as a male influence. He had his first heart attack at 42, and then he ran a marathon after having double bypass surgery. He was the first Australian to run a marathon after having that level of, let's call it, traumatic surgery.
Wow.
That was in 1984, and I was 10 years of age. I remember seeing him come in 4 hours and 6 minutes, I think. Crazy.
Pretty good pace, man.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. I've still got a photo up there behind me of him coming over the line. But I ran my first marathon when I was age 21, and then I really picked it up again sort of late 20s, early 30s, and I've now done 67 marathons and 24 ultra marathons.
It's incredible. My journey is a little bit different. I've been in sports my whole life and martial arts, but I got into running a couple of years ago, and a lot of it was inspired by a couple of guys. And I wonder if you know him in the ultra community. Have you heard of David Goggins?
Yeah,
absolutely. Have you heard of Cameron Haynes?
Yes, I'm a geek. I'm a geek to all this. I know some of the guys personally as well, not those two, but I was never what I'd call. I finished top 20 in races, but yeah, I'm totally addicted to the scene.
Rich Roll, you know that name?
That is my favorite podcast. I love. Do you know what I love about him? He's just so calm.
Yes. I know, isn't that beautiful? To be such a powerful force, to just be so chill.
I met up with Jesse Itzler as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was on Clubhouse. I interviewed him a few weeks ago on Clubhouse, and we talked about what it takes to buy a basketball team. Because I'd like to buy the Celtics one day. That's in my 20-year vision.
Okay.
And we talked a lot about ultra marathons and what it teaches you about both business and life.
We got a lot of common threads, brother. I actually ran with Jesse Itzler about 2 years ago to the day, close to it.
Oh, wow.
He was doing I think it was called the Calendar Club, like a mile a day for the corresponding day of the month. So like if it was the 15th of the month, he'd run 15 miles. If it was the 25th, he'd run 25. So it's consecutive it's like almost 300 to 400 miles in 1 month, which is insane. And he was getting towards the end of the month. It was in February, about 2 years ago. And I live in Atlanta. He's in Atlanta, one of us where he mainly is. And he put out an Instagram post saying, "Hey, I'm going to be over at Chastain Park. I'm going to go for a 10-mile run." Cause he was going to split 10 in the morning, 10 at night. And, he was running with, Mark, his good buddy, Mark Brown. And then also Chad Wright, Chad Wright's another ultra marathon ex-Navy.
He's an ex-Navy SEAL. Yeah. I've seen some of his stuff before. Yeah.
Total badass. And so, it was funny because we ran this run and they were doing the pacing to where we would run for 6 minutes, walk for 4, but we would do a mile in 10 minutes. So we were kind of just taking our time because he had to do so many miles. And I led the whole thing. And I'm at that time, I'm still 6'1", but I was probably more like 230, and now I'm about 215. So I was a little heavier. And I led the whole thing just because it was fun. Like I wasn't trying to prove a point, but I made so many great connections. And at the end of the race, he comes up and we take like a little selfie video. And I said something about, yeah, we just got done with 10 miles. And he almost like, not in a negative way, but he looked at me, he was like 10.2. He's like, don't cheat me out of my 0.2, because he was so needing to get the miles for the day. And I was like, you're right. So we just had this really cool moment. So it's amazing some of these synergies, brother. And you're across the pond. It's not like you're here in the States.
I know. But you know what I think that, where I found one of the gifts of podcasting, both guesting and having a podcast, is you just meet people. And I've got friendships globally now. I've got some business partnerships that have come off the back. You know what? In 150 episodes of my podcast, I've only had one interview, which was not great. Let's call it that. I won't say who it was with. but everything else has been great people wanting to help, all that sort of stuff, which is awesome.
Talk about it, man, a little bit now that we're into the podcast conversation. What made you get started? What's the context of the podcast and some of the people that have impacted you the most as guests?
Yeah, indeed. Absolutely. So the reason I did it is when I sort of went to Tony Robbins and I had that sort of epiphany and things were not going well previous to that, I realized I needed to do something that was going to provide. I mean, I still had like, the liabilities that you have from a 7-figure income at private equity. Like I had, the house that wasn't fully paid for, and I had the school fees and all these things, right? So woe is Nick, right? But the point was, I didn't want to leave my family in the lurch. So I said, what can I transform? What can I do differently? And I thought I need to go out there and build a brand. I need to at least build my profile. I need to get a message out there. But I also had this underlying feeling that I needed to tell my story, even if no one was ever going to listen to it. So it's kind of the concept of being cathartic.
That's the word that was just going through my mind, because brother, you're in complete alignment. That's crazy.
So the first, it's funny because some people like to journal, but I've always preferred anything that's audio particularly, but audio visual.
Same.
So the first, let's say 20 episodes of Scale Up Your Business is just me talking, sometimes no script, for an hour into the mic.
Wow.
And everything. I thought, you know what? I'm just going to get everything out there. Some of it's about fear and gratitude. Some of it's about my story. Some of it's about just insights right in the coalface, if you like, the lion's den of private equity. So I go really deep and tell all the stuff. And that started to become quite popular. But the reason I did it, and this is the thing, I thought, well, I've got to do something. So I went and got a mentor, a guy in the UK who's got a very, very prolific podcast here, a guy called Rob Moore. And I said to him, teach me how to do this. So he did. And then I sat on it for 6 months. Kid you not, I was like, oh, I can't do this. Right, whatever, like just mental stuff, even though I knew I needed to jump off the cliff.
Yep.
And then one day I said, that's it, I'm doing it, which was effectively about 2 years ago from now. And so then I sort of did that. It went to number 1 in the UK and number 17 in the US charts quickly. And then it stayed there for about 8 weeks. And I've got no idea what that means, except for it was interesting to see your name next to Tim Ferriss and all this stuff.
Hell yeah, it
is. But it did do wonders for the listeners and more people coming in. So whereas no one was listening to this, no one was listening to this, all of a sudden there were a few thousand people and obviously more now listening to it every episode. So the gift that's come from that has, as I said, been friendships, networks, business collaborations, multiple businesses that I have now underneath this, like a whole heap of trickle down revenue. And some of the people I've had on that have been probably the most inspiring. I know you've had John Lee Dumas on. I had JLD on. I had Jay Abraham on recently, who was so generous with his time. The interview was an hour, right? But he spent another hour with me dissecting my businesses, right? Wow. Just purely out of interest. Wow. Incredible, right? So I've had those sort of guys on. God, who else? I'm trying to think the most. There's a guy called Rock Thomas who I know very well. He's a kind of quite prolific guy in the Tony Robbins space, and now he has his own mastermind. But he's a good friend of mine, and he was one of my first interviews. And he taught me a lot about mindset, and intention, and finding out your true identity and living to that identity. So I've had a mix of mindset, a mix of business, a mix of personal story, and then I just have some crazy people. I had DJ Irie on the other day, who's the Miami Heat resident DJ.
Okay.
And he talked about how do you turn your passion into a business.
Wow.
So yeah, lots of different things, but I've learned so much from those mentors. I almost call these people mentors now because I learn something every conversation. And then I've applied that to either helping other people or helping myself in my businesses and things like that.
Yeah, brother. I look back on it and I'm about the same in terms of time and episodes in. I got a bunch of episodes in the bank. We just started releasing 3 a week because the great and mighty powerful John Lee Dumas was like, how many episodes do you release in a week? I'm like, 1. He goes, why?
I know. He's terrible like that, though. He's terrible.
In one conversation, he scaled me from 1. I was thinking about going to 2. He was like, no, take it to 4 or 5. And I was like, all right, we'll see. So I'm at 3 a week now.
I do 2 a week, and I was doing an extra Saturday episode because I was doing this thing called Chat with Titans, which is an interview on Clubhouse.
Yep.
Where I did David Meltzer the other day and a couple other guys. But I'm going to stick to 2.
I'm at 3. 3 is good for me. And the pivot to go from my previous podcast engineer to the people that are running it now, I mean, there's been a little bit of a transition, but it makes sense because I'm sitting on 30 episodes right now. I have 30 episodes in the bank and I just need to get them out.
Yeah,
so
you got to pump them out. I've got a similar thing. The waiting list to come on my show is about 3 months now.
Yeah.
And I'm being quite discerning now about, they don't have to necessarily be people with massive profiles, but they definitely need to have an angle because
100%.
Otherwise you end up just, there were so many people who just do coaching, for example, or they just do marketing and that's all they want to talk about. For me, it's about what's underneath that.
Layers.
Which makes a difference.
The layers of people, what makes you you and what's your story and your journey. And that makes for an inspiring conversation. And you find out the people that you want to do life with. Like for me, the podcast has been a masterclass on life and business and the color it's added to my life and the value in terms of relationships and business, everything that you just said. Going back to Tony Robbins, are you still pretty much a big Tony Robbins follower, devotee, so to speak?
Yeah. So what I ended up doing is after I went to that first event, I literally cried for 4 days at this event because it wasn't so much about the theater that happens at these events. There's a lot of jumping around and all that, but it's more the fact of everything that he said made a lot of sense in terms of decisions that I had made up to that point and why. So the psychology side of it was really interesting and the emotional state stuff. So I then decided to go and do all of his stuff. So I went and did Date with Destiny and he's got Life and Wealth Mastery. So I went and did all of that. And now I'm exploring a bit of John DeMartini. And
I just had him on the podcast.
Did you? So I'm speaking to him, I think, either tonight or tomorrow night in
Dr.
Clubhouse.
John. He is another gracious human being.
I've got his book here. So The Breakthrough Experience. I've actually signed up to do that in about, I think it's in May. I'm doing the online version of that. So
very cool, brother. Cool. It's amazing we're running in the same circles, man. It's very serendipitous. And I don't know if you read Tony Robbins' book, Money, Master the Game.
Yes, I have. Yeah.
So that was one of my best business cards for a while because I became a fiduciary a couple of years ago where I'm a fee-only financial planner. And what I would do is I would operate, like I would go to Tony Robbins events and people would be like, what do you do? I'd be like, have you read the book? And I'd be like, he wrote that book about me.
That's beautiful though, isn't it? I mean, because a lot of the time in those events, and this is something I don't think people understand, is you meet extremely successful people, like not necessarily people who have necessarily made it all the way, but their mindset is that of success.
100%.
So it's a great place. I've had lots of different business opportunities open up from those networks.
For sure. It's all like, so I started going to conferences a few years ago. My idea was just like, get in the room. And I would want to learn from the speakers. But what I found out pretty quickly is the people that were to your left and to your right and front and back, and the people that you were just bouncing into, that's where the magic is. The magic is the relationships, the ideas, the connections, the hanging out afterwards, going to grab dinner and exploring interests and all these different things. Right. And I mean, I've been a student at heart my whole life, and it's pushed me to where I can give back and be a teacher or a consultant, so to speak. And so I would highly recommend for people that are listening to this or watching this, get out there, network. And it's a little bit tougher right now with COVID, but there are ways to do it. Like you said, there's an online version of the course that you're doing, but there are people that are still meeting up, and just as long as it's safe and you feel called to do it, get out there.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I found, because I've spent a lot of time, just like we've mentioned a couple of times on Clubhouse, I've now made a network of people there, and we're launching potentially a mastermind. We're still in discussion about that for later in the year, probably November.
Beautiful.
But just off, again, some really interesting people that I've had the pleasure of being on stage with. And it's what happens off stage. It's the stuff that's happening in the WhatsApp groups afterwards and the connections that we're doing. And so like in many cases, that whole world is just accelerated through social media yet again. So I'm looking forward to going back to face-to-face because I want to do that.
For sure.
But at the same time, I've enjoyed meeting new people through this type of medium as well.
Clubhouse has been beautiful, brother. What's your experience been like? How long have you been on it? How much time do you usually tend to it every week? What's the experience been like?
Yeah, so I went into it pretty hard. So I started January 5th. So we're now talking 2 months or thereabouts. I've got a reasonable follower count now, about close to 40,000. And the reason for that is because I started to collaborate with some interesting people on stages. And that's where I met Jesse Itzler and a few others. And for me, it's two things. It's definitely about offering value, which then builds the brand, right? So I'm not one of these people who just goes out there and says, oh, it's all about contribution. I'm spending X number of hours a day, blah, blah, blah. I'm putting about 4 hours a day in at a maximum. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of inquiries that then fuel my other businesses. We had 670 leads come through Instagram messaging in my first 2 weeks.
Incredible. Yes.
And some really good business off the back of that, where we're going in and working with 7-figure entrepreneurs, 7-figure businesses, scaling them to 8. That's what we do. And so there's a lot of people like that who was stuck. And then I got on stage, we connected, and then that's turned into stuff, which is good.
Beautiful, brother. Yeah. The engagement, the impact, the connections that I've seen. And it's amazing if you just show up and, you get on and you speak, or you can make an impact. I mean, immediately you start seeing, it's like a bell goes off. It's just like these connections start coming through and these relationships start forming. And it's just a beautiful, disruptive place to be. And it's a nice pivot for the marketplace of social media to try something new that was a home run.
Yeah. And I think it's just different and people want to connect. Right. And I think, people are sick of maybe the Zoom stuff, particularly if you kind of, having to have a shower and a shave or whatever it is. Right.
Right.
But just to be able to put something on while you're in bed. Right. And just chat and contribute. It's been interesting. I'll be curious to see where it goes, because there's a lot of competition coming into this space now. Twitter Spaces is launching, and then Mark Cuban's got another app called Fireside coming out towards the end of the year.
Like fireside chat.
Yeah, that's the concept. I think it's more focused on getting access to influencers and celebrities and business magnates in a format where you can question them. So it's similar, whereas Clubhouse is obviously anybody with a story can get on stage.
Yeah.
But we'll see. I mean, there's been dark sides of it too. I mean,
for sure. Yeah, I've heard. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's just the way. Literally, there's a lot of potential money that's changing hands with deals and things like that. And probably the best way I've described it is like maybe South Central Los Angeles in the late 80s, early 90s. If you went on someone's patch, to sell some stuff, you might get someone driving by.
Right.
There is a bit of bullying that I'm seeing, but again, I don't let myself get consumed by any of that stuff.
Yeah, no, brother. It's Joe Rogan calls them hucksters, just people that are selling something just to sell it, or they're full of it and they're just trying to get you in their next thing. And it's like, who you align with. You resonate with people, you trust them, you look at them and they're successful. They might have some common connections that can vet them and vouch for them. There's a way around these things. But I want to talk about, because as a wealth manager, that's my bread and butter as a fiduciary. And you talked about multiple streams of income. And I literally teach people, part of this is my living, is like, they say the average millionaire has 3 to 5 income streams, not including like their main bread and butter. And, statistics are usually bullshit. So who knows if that's really true, but you got to have more than 1 or 2 if you want to stop working. And if you want to, and I don't say stop working, I just mean not have a job until you die. Right. And stop trading time for money. And so with that concept, you mentioned that you've already got a couple in motion, a couple 7-figure businesses, but you already have another 3 or so coming online here pretty soon. Can you speak to your mentality, on where that came from in terms of the idea of multiple revenue streams? And then B, what are some of those other businesses that you're scaling up?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I have 7 separate companies in different areas. I'm really boring when it comes to this, because I only do one thing, right? So a lot of people sort of have a spread betting philosophy, if you like, when it comes to wealth creation. And I have no issue with that, right, at all. But I know how to buy businesses for very little money. I know how to scale them up where they're under optimized or under leveraged. And I know what are the ratios and dynamics to get them to be sold, particularly into mid-market private equity. So I know exactly what threshold a business needs to get to with the right characteristics to maximize and the opportunity of a sale, right? So when I say I've got these companies, they're either businesses that I have acquired or have developed off what I've been doing for the last few years. And we've got another 3 companies that we're in the process of acquiring right now. Okay. So the way I do it really quickly is I use a mechanism called leverage buyouts. So I effectively buy a company that's, let's say, worth 3 times profit, usually between $1 to $10 million in revenue. and I will effectively buy it for 3 times the profit of that from someone who's, for whatever reason, motivated to sell that company, right? So I never want to pay any more than 3 times because I want to scale it and sell it for between 6 to 10.
Okay.
And that's called multiple arbitrage for anyone who's interested in the model. And the way that I do that usually is I'm buying something which has got a good brand in an established geography, has probably the poorest website you've ever seen. Has never, some of them don't even have a website. They've got serious stuff, man. They've got like,
I believe it.
and there's like 10,000. I think that the statistic is 10,000 baby boomers retiring every single day in North America right now, and a lot of them are business owners, and they will close their businesses down, right? So when we buy these businesses, we do asset finance against any of the assets that we can find in the business, including the receivables and things.
Equipment, all these things.
Sorry?
You do like equipment and different things?
Yeah, it depends on the businesses. But the main thing we look for is at least a 50% seller finance model, which effectively means we're going to pay the seller back over a 3 to 4 year period from the profits in the business that we are then acquiring.
Got it.
And most big sort of Wall Street deals are done like this, but no one ever understands it. But the way I describe it to people is if you buy a house and you get a mortgage, you effectively still get to live in that house while you're paying it off over time.
Yep.
And it's exactly the same. You buy a business, you get to run it, you get the profit, but then you're paying the previous owner back over time.
Lowers risk as long as you can keep the business going.
Yeah, and there is a bit of a dynamic around, to get the seller to agree to those terms, they firstly have to trust that you can do what you say. So my background helps that. But you've also got to look at it like the only other alternative a lot of these small business owners have is they're going to close the business.
Yep.
Fire their staff, Doris, who's been the receptionist for 20 years. And that legacy position, or that I don't want my legacy that I've created to be destroyed. That's why you can buy these businesses for very attractive sums. So that's all I really do. But there's I call it empire building, but there's a very myriad, back to multiple streams of income. There are multiple ways of monetizing that model.
So when you're buying a business, essentially 3 times profit, right? And turning around, and you said, I think it was 6 to 10 or 6 to 20 was the number?
Well, 6 to 10 is a minimum. I have sold a business for 14 times profit before.
Okay. So let's say 6 to 10 minimum. How's the marketplace for this? I'm assuming based on your career, you've had so much time, as what they say in military, time and rate, where you've done this for so long that you probably have connections and know people, and maybe you can create your own marketplace at this point. But how is the marketplace to be able to take this business that you've bought for 3 times profit to be able to put it out and actually sell it for 6 to 10 times? Is it pretty open, the market, so to speak? Because what I'm thinking is more like from like a stock market standpoint, a real estate standpoint, or even COVID standpoint, with like just kind of a lot of the financial turmoil we've seen in certain industry sectors. How's the market for you to be able to turn around and sell this business for 6 to 10x?
You've got to do 2 things, right? And the beauty of these 2 things I'll explain is that you have absolute control on what they are. So if I bought stocks or shares, for example, I don't really have any control over that, right? If I buy a house, I can renovate the house, but there is a fixed, valuation, if you like. There's a opportunity cost to whatever I decide to do to that house, right? So it's fixed. In a business, you've got organic and strategic. I'm going to call it scale up. So organic is, let's say one of the businesses we were looking at was a car wash in Texas. Okay, great car wash, cash rich. Never really did any marketing other than flyers, literally paper flyers. So organic scale up in that situation would be, okay, why don't we have a look at kind of how we can improve the marketing? Can we partner up and get databases and do a bit more email stuff? Can we do some sort of incentive scheme so people get their 10th car wash free, whatever it is? But there's a marketing and promotional element that a lot of these businesses have never done. That's the organic. The other thing we do is we look to buy up and down and sort of horizontally in what we call the value chain. So I was looking at a landscaping business in Florida, and we also looked at an adjacent sort of cleaning business. And the whole idea was that the landscaping business was already serving a lot of gated communities in West Palm Beach, and the cleaning service was doing the same. If I buy them and put them together, take out the cost of the back end operations, you don't need 2 IT people and 2 ops people and whatever else. That's called creating synergies. Then I can increase the profit, and that's when it starts to become attractive. So I'm not just buying a business and sitting on it. I'm buying a business and looking at those 2 levers. And if I can get the EBITDA position up to, say, a minimum of $5 million from whatever I've purchased, so by creating a number of businesses together, it's called a roll up, then I'm getting into the threshold of mid-market private equity. Now, as I said, if I create a quite a sexy group, right, that's very clear, has recurring revenue, all the different things that are valuable, I can look to sell that for somewhere between $35 to $50 million off what has been a very modest investment.
Huge, huge opportunity. So are you dealing with, high net worth individuals, private equity directly in terms of maybe either funding deals and or being interested in being part of deals as partners, limited partners, general partnerships? Are you dealing with any of that sort of stuff?
Yeah, there's three parts to it. So I teach people, I teach anybody how to buy businesses using leverage buyouts. So if you want to become an entrepreneur, let's say, for example, you've left your corporate job and you don't want to start a business. I wasn't good at startup, as I explained, but I can teach people how to do deals, right? Of course, you still need to have people around you to help the scale up. But a lot of people, let's say, for example, you're a marketing director in a corporate and you now want to become an entrepreneur. My advice is go and buy a business and then bring your marketing expertise into something you have equity value in. So I do that. I work with businesses that are currently 7 figures that want to grow through acquisitions. So that's the roll up and the bolt on. So, again, someone might say, how do I grow quicker? Well, the way to grow quicker is buy another business, buy your competitor, right? All of a sudden you've doubled your customer base by doing one strategic move. And then when we have some of these deals, we'll go to investors where the last percentage of the deal, if we need some cash into the deal, some capital, I'll go and find the business. I'll structure the deal. I'll do the negotiation. I'll also have my team to do the scale up. And the investor might have to put in the last, let's say, 30% of the deal, right? So I'll go, and it's almost like a pre-packaged investment, but they're getting significant equity value in something that has much more leverage to be able to grow than, say, putting that same money into another asset class.
Beautiful, brother. That's
how I do it. That's very technical, Jesse, but you can see I'm a geek when it comes to this stuff.
No, I love it. I'm catching what you're putting down, man, and it's extremely interesting. And I have high net worth clients that are always looking for opportunities, so it's something we could probably talk about offline.
Yeah, let's do that for sure. I've definitely got some interesting stuff that I think it's just another thing to put in front of people that if you're into business and you're into the growth that you can get from business, then it's an interesting thing to look at.
It's unbelievable. And, even for me, I've been a student of different like financial gurus, so to speak, like Warren Buffett, Tony Robbins, all these other people, even my mentor, Patrick Tucker in Omaha. But it's all about multiple revenue streams and making them efficient, making them to where you don't have to really trade time for money. Maybe you have to spend some time on the front end to kind of get it going, maybe put a team in place to manage it for you. But it sounds like you've done a lot of that.
Yeah, one of the key things in this acquisition space is you want to buy businesses that have a natural number 2, like a general manager. And effectively, what I like to do is have someone who's not overly strategic, but they know how to run to a high level of precision. And so for me, it's about when I used to be able to fly, I would spend every quarter just going and spending a day in the businesses. And I was in the process now of buying businesses where I like to go on vacation. And so I can turn up, I can do 3 days of work, if you like, and then I can spend 2 weeks with the kids at Disney World.
Beautiful.
And I have something that I can run from a spreadsheet and a couple of Zoom calls every week. And that's all I have to do.
It's beautiful, brother. Now, how many years have you been in this space?
M&A properly 15 years.
It's the overnight success model, right? They say the overnight success takes 15 to 20 years. You're right there.
Yeah. And also I love it. So back to mission and all that sort of stuff, it doesn't feel like work. And I think, again, if you can do something where you really enjoy all the dimensions of that thing, then, you never retire, right? It just becomes what you're about, who you're trying to help and all that sort of thing as well.
Here's a question that stems from that. And just, I've been a lifelong entrepreneur since I was a kid, like way before, I'm 39. So Gary Vee wasn't even a thing back when I was a kid, but I was buying, selling, trading comic books, baseball cards, shoveling snow for money in Boston, our favorite sports teams that are up there. Go Celtics. I was hustling too, man. It's a very hustling type environment up there. So I was going up to Logan Airport, and these smart carts that move luggage around the airport, if you return them to the stall, you get a quarter that comes back. And so we would just run through the terminals all day on a Saturday or Sunday as kids, making a few bucks and getting chased by security through the terminals, which was like the best part. And then for a couple of years, I actually, sold drugs and had people working for me and whatever before I joined the military. So it was just like this entrepreneurial knack that's grown into, I've started up 4 companies, 2 were learning lessons, and then 2 were successful. And in that journey of entrepreneurship, there's peaks and valleys. And as you get more seasoned, you can kind of flatten that out and you can kind of streamline things. But there's lonely times, and I'm in a people business through my wealth management, through my podcast, and this other business that I just kind of started with some friends. But there's lonely times. There's times where you may not be at your best. There's times where you feel kind of down and out. Where do you go during those times for you? When do you reach out to a mentor or an audiobook? Cause you said you're into audiobooks, or maybe hit the road and do some miles. Like how are those moments for you? And what do you do in those moments?
Yeah, I got some help, if you like, mentoring or coaching on this stuff a while back. I'm super intentional with my time. So if you looked at my diary right now, everything is time blocked for the next 6 weeks.
Smart.
And there is flexibility for things, but I always schedule the stuff that's for me first, family second, and then work third. All right, and I'm really, really focused on that, because one of my coaches said to me once, actually it was beginning of when everything started to lock down about a year ago. And he said, what's the biggest risk for you now that you know that this is not just a small thing, COVID? And I was like, oh, this business that we've just acquired does this, or my core business goes back, or, all these sort of things came into my head. And he said, no, it's you. You're the biggest risk, right? Not looking after you. So I have that schedule. I'm very, very focused on all sorts of personal development. We talked before about John DeMartini. I used to have this routine where every quarter, without fail, I would jump on a plane and go to some sort of seminar or conference.
Beautiful.
And I haven't done as much of that this year, and I've noticed it.
Yeah.
Because I still can't get my head around the idea. The virtual thing is okay, but I know people are saying it's great. But as soon as we start to fly in the next 2 months, I've already got my next 3 things in process right now.
Beautiful.
And that's what I do. I need to be in that environment of success, of mindset. And I find even just doing that once a quarter, it changes everything. And I can roll that. I can run with it for the next 3 months. And then I need to go and recharge again.
Motion creates emotion, brother. Getting out there, shaking hands, kissing babies, being in the mix, being around other like-minded individuals that are just at maybe different levels. You have your rule of thirds, where you have people that are ahead of where you are that you want to learn from. You have your people that are right with you in that same walk in life, and they can share and talk about best practices or go through war stories and things together. And then you have that other band in the bottom of the third that's coming up that you can take all that information and pass it along, brother. And I think that masterminds and conferences and networking things, they allow these opportunities, and it keeps you juiced up a little bit, because you might get competitive, or you might get a business opportunity. Yeah. These things that happen. So I love it, brother. I'm very much of the same mind. And not only quarterly for the conferences is kind of where I'm at, but also, and now we're putting on conferences, but outside of that, I would even try to do like once a month for a day or two, take like a personal day, whether it's like an overnight or if it's just a day to kind of just go do what I need to do, not worry about business, family, kids, anything that I'm doing. And it's such a beautiful reset. And the perspective that you gain is immeasurable. So it's basically that old story of the guy that has the saw, and he's sawing down the trees, and it gets dull and he can't saw down any more trees. And the guy comes up to him and says, hey, why don't you sharpen your saw? And he's like, I have no time. I can't stop sawing. And then the other guy stops and sharpens his blade, and he can cut down more trees faster, more efficiently, because he took the time to recharge, essentially. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And there's the analogy of like the sports car, right? They can run for ages, but there's a point where they have to pit stop.
That's
right.
It.
And that's exactly, but yeah, that's an important part to me. And I think I try and explain that to lots of people. Anyone who's facing burnout, one of the things, again, a coach said to me is just slow down to speed up.
Yep.
Right. And that makes a big difference. So it's a really good message, I think, for people who are listening today. If they're feeling like that, just slow down. It's going to help you. It's going to serve you more than it's going to stop you or hinder you.
I love it, brother. I love it. And then just going back to health and wellness as an entrepreneur, obviously you have to be fit of mind, soul, body. How often are you training and taking care of yourself? And I know that you were doing ultras. Have you done any races, or even are you keeping up with running? Like, what are you doing to stay active?
Yeah, no, I'm massively into physical fitness on all levels. So I lift, right? I do a bit of yoga, usually once or twice a week. And then I still run a lot. So I run most days. There's probably one day off. And it changes from just like a short 4K run, where in the mornings, I just want to go out there and do some incantations or something. And I just literally go for a short run. But then on a Sunday, I'll always go out for about 3 hours.
Nice.
Now that's not a marathon, because I run on trails these days. And I don't actually worry about the distance. I just go out there and I explore. I set a route on my watch, then I kind of plan it, and then I just go out there and I try and find new spaces. And that's great. Sometimes I'll listen to like the Rich Roll podcast for a bit, then I'll turn it off for an hour. But that to me is my one thing in the week, which is my sort of supercharge. And
What do
that
you feel
really
like you've
resets me.
learned when you run? Do you get meditative? Do business ideas come for you? Do you get to create space where you can kind of just be and go zen? Like what happens when you run?
Yeah, I solve problems. So if I've got issues, we had a legal issue recently, and I had to go out for a longer run on that just to kind of get it clear in my own head. So yeah, it's and particularly the ultras, and I will get back to that. I had some knee surgery and I had to have some stem cells put in my knee, so it's been a bit of a time getting back to it. But you have to be in a meditative state to run for 24 hours.
Yeah.
and this is the thing, right? The grit, the resilience, the chance of it failing is super high. So you're always going into the unknown, and that's the thing. And you learn all about your not just your physical ability, because you can train for that, right? You can train for that. You might have something that comes up in the race, but like Goggins is classic, right? He breaks a leg and still runs. It's the mental fortitude.
Yep.
And that 40%, activation that people say we really connect with our brains. That's the thing that fascinates me, and that's why I like to do it, just to see how far I can take it.
Have you heard the term biohacking?
Yeah, I'm hugely into it. I've got all of Dave Asprey's books here. They're all good.
Have you heard of Ben Greenfield?
Yeah, I haven't studied much of him. I'm sort of into. I do the bulletproof coffee. I do the fasting.
Yep.
I haven't got into is it nootropics? Is that what it's called?
He does a bunch of different stuff. Part of one of the things he does is use nootropics for sure.
Yeah, I haven't got into that yet. That's my next thing. I'm only just starting to do some reading on it now.
I'm going to plug you into a fefew people because I feel like based on what you're telling me, Ben Greenfield is going to be a little more your speed. And then also, do you know the company in Austin, Texas called Onnit, Onnit?
Yeah, Aubrey, is it Aubrey Marcus?
Yes.
I don't know him. I haven't met him or anything like that, but his stuff fascinates me.
He's a stud, man. He's into total human optimization, which includes the body, the spirit, and business. And so he's another guy I think that you'd really love. And another guy, Paul Chek, Chek. Have you heard of Paul Chek?
Yeah, that rings a bell as well. I haven't studied his stuff.
Those guys are, I think, everything that I know about you in the short amount of time, which I feel is a ton, based on a lot of just intuition that I get, and things like we were bullied growing up. I was bullied too. Like all these different things that have like put us on a path with dads and everything and all the stuff. These guys I think would be perfect for you. So I'm going to plug you into them. But I love it, man. I'm a biohacker too, man, from cold plunges to cold showers to
I do that every morning.
Breath work. I even do plant medicines. I'm going to Peru this week, so it's going to be crazy. But
it's funny how these things happen. I think again, for people listening to this episode, we've just met, right? But it's funny how these things happen, right? Because you just meet people who have got similar stories, journeys, pathways in the future, interests, isn't it? Like, it happens.
Podcast, man.
I know it happens with regularity. It's kind of bizarre. Not every conversation's like this, but there's a lot, right? So yeah, I appreciate that. Any of those guys, again, send me some links or whatever. I want to increase my education in that space. I'm 46 now. That's why I look so old. So
you don't look 46.
I'm doing my best. But I'm massively into energy and vitality.
Same.
And for me, that's one of the best ways to manage state, as well as the mental and emotional stuff that we spoke about.
I love it, brother. Well, listen, I know that I feel called to in the future have you on the show again. There's a lot we could pick into that we haven't even scratched the surface on. And like you said, how long do you have? Like we could definitely go on for hours. So we have to chop it up. But brother, thank you so much. Let me be the first one from the audience to say you're an amazing, mighty, powerful human being. We're so thankful that you're here on the show and what you're doing in the world. And we look forward to the next one. He's the amazing, the mighty, the powerful Nick Bradley. I'm Jesse T. Be sure to catch us on next week's episode of The Jesse T Show.